All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's live cooking demonstration. My name is Ryan Smith. I'm the Wellness Program Administrator at Georgia State University's Employee Development and Wellness Services. By trade, I am a registered dietitian, so I'm always on the hunt for healthy and convenient recipes that we can add into our diet and just incorporate throughout the week. Before we get started, I did want to cover just a couple quick things. We are going to be recording today's session, so if you'd like to view it again later or potentially share it with a colleague who couldn't attend today, we do upload recordings of all of our events to our EDWS YouTube page, which we'll be sure to share in some follow-up emails. Additionally, throughout today's presentation, if you've got questions, comments, or just suggestions you want to throw out related to the recipe, we'd love to hear it. You can use the WebEx chat feature, and at the end of today's presentation, I'll make sure to address those questions or comments. I'm joined today by my colleague, Cheryl Johnson-Ransaw. She's online to help troubleshoot any issues that may arise. So if you are experiencing audio or visual issues, please use the chat box. Make sure you send your message to all panelists. Cheryl will be online, and that way she can keep an eye out and try to help you troubleshoot if any of those difficulties do pop up. So with today's recipe, we are going to be making these crunchy cauliflower bites with a curry lime aioli, which is just a sauce that we're going to be dipping them in. So this recipe is not a full meal recipe. Traditionally, whenever we do this program, we're looking for lunch, breakfast, dinner recipe, something like that. But every once in a while, we like to mix it up. And I actually had someone reach out to me and ask about healthy like snack or appetizers. And that's an interesting challenge. When we think about appetizers, frequently we might think of things that are deep fried or battered, have a lot of calories and not a lot of nutritional value. So I found this recipe and thought it was very interesting, gave it a try and found out it was delicious. So I wanted to share it with everyone today. So again, not a full meal, but this is great as an appetizer, or if you're having a social event and you want to have people over, just something for everyone to share. Now, in terms of equipment, we're going to need pretty basic things today. Some mixing bowls, a cutting board. We're going to use a grater to get some lime zest at a certain point. And then we're going to make use of the oven today. So the first thing you should do is preheat your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, which I will do now. Okay, so while your oven preheats, we will get started with the star of today's show, which is, of course, our giant head of cauliflower. So for this recipe, you're going to want about 6 cups of chopped cauliflower, which is roughly equivalent to just a normal size head of cauliflower. So you can go to the store and get one of these, and this will be perfect for the recipe. Now, when you get this, you're going to have some really large leaves coming off the bottom of it. I will typically pull those the really big leaves off and throw them in the trash, and then you'll keep these leaves on the bottom because they're pretty firmly attached. I just removed the big one so that I can rinse it and wash it really thoroughly before we cut into it, get off any of the dirt or things like that that may be on it. And I like to remove the big leaves so the water can really come into contact with the whole vegetable. So from here, the best way that I found to cut cauliflower, you've got your stem here, sort of the base of it. We're going to put that on the cutting board, and we are going to cut directly down into it, cutting it in half. Now, be careful when you do this. Depending on how sharp your knife is, you may have to sort of do a little bit of a sawing motion there, but you should be able to cut through. And now we've got our 2 halves. The next thing we're going to do is quarter it. So you've got a half. We're going to cut it in half once more. Take that flat part, place it on the cutting board. That's your firm surface, so it won't rock too much. And then we'll cut down again. Okay. I'm going to set this piece to the side just so we've got some room to work with. Once you've got a quarter, you're still going to have this middle part of the cauliflower that's very firm, very tough. You don't really want to try to eat that part. So we're going to take the knife and do a diagonal cut, removing as much of that as we can in that cut. That will also take the leaves off with it, and we can dispose of those or move them to the side. Now, once you've made that cut, you should find in most cases that you can actually just break the cauliflower apart pretty easily. And if you cut maybe a little shallower, you may have to use a knife to break them apart, but for the most part, you'll be able to pull them apart. Now, in terms of the pieces, we're aiming for pieces that are maybe an inch and a half in size. We don't want them to be really big. Imagine an appetizer where you're going to have little bite-sized pieces, maybe like what you'd put on a salad. So after you break them apart and you see these large pieces, I recommend taking a knife and going back through and just cutting them into a shape and size that you're comfortable with, that you think would work well for the appetizer. There's no perfect size here, perfect method, but you can kind of eyeball it and get a feel. To the best of your ability, try to make them equal in size. This will help them cook evenly when they're in the oven. If you've got a really big piece and a really small piece, that small piece might get super crispy, and that big piece just might not be able to cook all the way through as thoroughly. So I'm sort of just taking a quick glance at these and then cutting and continuing to move them into our bowl here, where I'm just setting them aside to have more room on our cutting board. So we'll repeat this with this other quarter now. Again, we're going to cut at a diagonal angle and remove that middle piece there, and we'll see those leaves fall right off when that happens. And if you've got any other leaves still attached, you can just go ahead and manually pull them out. And then we can break our cauliflower apart into little pieces. Now, cauliflower is a great vegetable. It's very, very nutritious. And I think frequently we talk about eating the rainbow and getting in different colors of fruits and vegetables. And cauliflower is unique because it is, a white vegetable, which we don't have a lot of those. We might think of onions as another example potentially. But they are very, very nutritious. They have a considerable amount of fiber in them. And whenever we're making any recipe, we're always looking for good sources of fiber. Fiber helps us with having a healthy digestive system. It can help keep our cholesterol at a healthy level. It can help control our blood sugar so that it stays at a more even line rather than doing like a roller coaster up and down sort of thing. I'm going to repeat this process for the other half of the cauliflower. So we've got a half here. I'm going to place that flat part down, cut it in half once more to get my quarters, and then repeat that process that I just did to get the rest of these cauliflower bites. Cauliflower is also an interesting vegetable in that it's got a decent little bit of protein in it. I wouldn't quite call it a good source of protein. It's not going to be the main source of protein in a meal like chicken might be, or tofu or chickpeas. But compared to a lot of other vegetables, there is some protein content in it, which we'll actually see when we look at the nutrition information for this recipe. That's reflected that for an appetizer, there's a decent bit of protein. But we've also got another sort of secret ingredient that's going to help us get a little more protein in here. So now I'm coming to my last quarter here. We'll go ahead and cut that and move it to the side. And what you may find with this recipe, this actually happened to me when I made a test batch earlier, you may end up with more cauliflower than you can reasonably fit on a sheet pan to put in the oven. If that happens, you can either get another pan if you've got one or you've got room for it, or you can save the extra cauliflower and maybe put it on a salad or find another use for it. I ended up just saving some of the extra one because I know I'll be able to snack on it later. Because depending on the size of the head of cauliflower you get, there might just be some leftover extra pieces. Okay, so we've got that chopped up nicely. We've got a big bowl of it here. I'm going to move the cutting board over to the side for now. And let's start talking about our next step. So we've got our other mixing bowls here. What I'm going to do is take a medium to small size mixing bowl, and we'll talk about our next ingredient, which is going to be chickpea flour or garbanzo bean flour. So it is flour for baking that's made of chickpeas, as the name suggests. And one of the nice features about this is it's got some real improved nutritional stats compared to your traditional white flour. It is significantly higher in fiber and protein content. So that was that ingredient I referred to that's going to give us some extra protein in this recipe. So mixing a little bit of that into different recipes can give you some interesting flavors, textures, and then we're really focusing on the nutritional aspect here. So you can find this in the grocery store next to the regular flour in most cases. There'll usually be a specialty flour section where they might have almond flour, gluten-free flour, or in this case, chickpea flour. We're going to measure out a half a cup of this. And we'll just add it to the bowl there. Okay, and so what we're going to do is we're going to make a batter of sorts to dip the cauliflower in. So we are going to next add a 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. We're going to add just a pinch of salt for this part and save the rest of our salt for a little bit later on. And then we're going to do a tablespoon of just really finely chopped parsley. I went ahead and pre-chopped this just to save us a little time today. And we're going to throw that into the mixture here. Okay. And then we're going to do one more ingredient we want to add. So I'm using fresh limes today. You are welcome to just use bottled lime juice if you prefer. Back here. And you're going to do about a tablespoon of lime juice. I'm going to be pretty fast and loose with that today and just squeeze half of the lime into it and call that a tablespoon. But if you've got bottled lime juice, you can measure that out. You can always add more or less if you want. But we're going to give a little bit of lime juice to this. And we're going to save this piece of lime because we are going to get the zest off of it later using the cheese grater here. Okay, so set that lime to the side, and I'm just going to clear some of the clutter. Okay. So our next step is we're going to get half a cup of water and add it in here, and we're going to mix that with the flour, and that's going to give our batter that will dip the cauliflower in. Okay. Half a cup of water. And you may find you want to add another tablespoon or two of water, depending on how much cauliflower you have. You know, some pieces may just get a little less batter on it. It really won't matter too much. And we're going to actually use a whisk for this and just mix it together until you've incorporated the water and the flour. Again, we're making a batter of sorts, so it should kind of resemble if you've made a dough before, like for cookies or anything like that. It's going to be similar in that texture. Very different color, though. Hopefully you can see the sort of bright yellow color that comes from using the chickpea flour as opposed to regular flour. Okay, so we've got a nice batter there. I'm going to get the excess off of the whisk here and set this to the side. All right. Now, before we dip the cauliflower in that, we've got another mixing bowl here that we're going to prepare some things in. So this one, medium-sized bowl, you're going to end up dipping cauliflower in the batter and then transferring it to this bowl to pick up some breadcrumbs. So we're going to use breadcrumbs today. These are just the traditional panko breadcrumbs. What I'd recommend doing is when you're at the grocery store, you'll see a lot of different brands. Try to find one that's lower in sodium. This one only has 35 milligrams in half a cup. It was the lowest sodium one I could find. And the reason I say that is we are adding salt to this recipe in a couple different places. So we can keep this sodium lower and then choose the amount of salt we want to add. If you grab one of the brands that's higher in salt, I saw some that had a significant amount of sodium per serving. I would recommend cutting back on the salt we add to the recipe, potentially taking it out entirely if you get a very, very salty brand. But this one's nice and low in sodium because that's what I was looking for on the label. So we're going to do 1.5 cups of these breadcrumbs. I'm just using a half cup measure here, just kind of recycling that. So you'll see me do this 3 times to equal that 1.5 cup. Okay. So 1.5 cups of your breadcrumbs. Then we're going to add some spices and seasoning in here. We're going to do a teaspoon of ground cumin, a teaspoon of garlic salt. Oh, I'm sorry, not garlic salt, garlic powder. We're adding salt separately. So just regular garlic powder there, 1 teaspoon of it. And then we did a pinch of salt earlier when we were making the batter. We're going to take half of a teaspoon of salt now and add it into our breadcrumbs. And then what you can do is just give that a quick stir, mix it around so that the seasoning is mixed in with the breadcrumbs evenly. Okay. So we are going to use the batter to coat the cauliflower. We're going to dip it in the breadcrumbs. The batter will help it stick to it, and then we're going to transfer it to bacon. Now this foil looks a little worse for wear. I used it earlier to make the other batch if you're wondering why it's so beat up and wrinkly looking. So we're going to do cooking spray and just quickly grease that foil there. So now you can do this with your hands if you want. If you prefer to use tongs, you can do that. You may want to use a slotted spoon, whatever's easiest. We are going to move some cauliflower pieces into the batter. I just move over a couple at a time, like so. And then we are going to, I'll use the tongs. We're going to move it around and just coat each piece of cauliflower with that batter. You want to make sure that it's coming into contact with every side of it because that will allow it to pick up the greatest amount of breadcrumbs. So we'll coat just like that. And then we'll transfer these pieces over to our breadcrumb mixture. If you've got a lot of batter on it, go ahead and shake it a little bit, or that's what the slotted spoon could be for. The batter can kind of drip through. and then transfer it. You don't want to get a big blob of batter because that will stick to the breadcrumbs, and then you may have these clumps and not have as many breadcrumbs to work with for the remaining cauliflower pieces. So again, just shaking some of that excess batter off and then transferring it over to the breadcrumbs. From here, I'm just going to mix those breadcrumbs in and get a light coating on these. It does not have to be super dense. It is totally okay if you can still see the cauliflower through it. What we're trying to do is get a light, crispy coating just to give them some nice extra texture and flavor when we bite into them. So get those breadcrumbs on there and then transfer them over to your baking sheet. Okay. Now, we've got a lot of cauliflower here and a lot of batter. This process takes maybe about 5 minutes to just dip them in the batter, shake off that excess, get the breadcrumbs on there, and transfer them. But for the sake of time, I won't make you watch me do all of them. I've got some pre-prepared that I can show you what it looks like. So you'll line up your full baking sheet, and then you'll move that cauliflower into the oven at 400 degrees and bake anywhere from 40 to 50 minutes. You're watching for them to become a crisp golden brown. And if you find that it's not as crispy as you'd like, you can always leave it in for a couple extra minutes. Just keep an eye on them. I also recommend giving it a stir about halfway through the time you cook, just so they can cook more evenly. You don't want one side to be in contact with the bottom and burn a little too much. So that's the battering and coating process. We move it to the oven, but there is one more thing we're going to do, and that is we're going to make our curry lime aioli sauce. So while this would be baking, this would be the best time to make the sauce. To make that, we're going to use mayonnaise. We'll need half a cup. You can use traditional mayonnaise, which is pretty cheap and easy to get, or if you want to make this full dish vegan, you can use a vegan mayo, and that will work well too. So we're going to measure out half a cup. I'm going to rinse out my half a cup measure here real quick. Okay. And then let me get a spoon. So half a cup of either your regular mayonnaise or your vegan mayonnaise. All right, and then we'll just scoop that into a smaller size mixing bowl. We don't need a whole lot of room here to mix this one. All right, from here, we're going to add 3/4 of a teaspoon of curry powder. Now you can use whatever color curry powder you might happen to have in your cabinet. We're just doing red curry powder today. So 3/4 of a teaspoon. And then what we're going to do now is we are going to use that other half of the lime. We're going to get some lime zest off of it to add in. That gives it a really nice flavor. It also changes the color a little bit in an interesting way. If you're using bottled lime juice, you won't have the lime zest portion of this. That's okay. The lime juice will still add plenty of flavor. But if you do have a fresh lime, I encourage you to do this. If you've got a cheese grater, you can make use of the really small grating holes on the side of it here. Or you may have an actual lime zester where you can just file that off. So putting a hand on top, placing it firmly on the cutting board, we're just going to run the lime down across those holes. And we're going to get some lime zest. And you can see you'll start to rub through it. So just rotate the area of the lime that you're zesting and make your way around the lime. Now, as for the amount, the recipe calls for, I think, getting about a teaspoon of lime zest. I usually just do half of a lime and throw that in. You're not going to really be able to mess up the recipe by doing too much or too little lime zest. So whatever works for you is fine. So typically we'll get a little bit of zest collecting at the bottom, but I find a lot of it will stick to the grate. So I'll usually take my hand on the inside where it's smooth and just scrape off some of that extra lime zest. I'll then grab that and sprinkle that in, and then use the remaining lime juice in here to squeeze on top of our curry lime aioli that we're making. So it's really just mayonnaise, lime juice, and curry powder that we're mixing together. It makes a very tasty sauce. So then you can just stir that together. You can use a whisk if you want, but I find just stirring with a spoon works okay too. We're trying to mix the curry powder in evenly with the mayo so the flavor is evenly distributed. And depending on how much the color of the curry powder, you may see the sauce or the mayo change a little bit. It can take on a slight reddish tint or a slight yellowish tint. Again, it'll depend on what kind of curry powder you use, but that's what our dip ends up looking like. So Once you have baked it for about 50 minutes and you pull it out of the oven, you can then serve it. So this is one that we went ahead and pre-made here. I've just got the curry lime aioli in the middle. I've got those crispy cauliflower bites on the outside, and the parsley is just there for garnish to make it look nice. But I want to show you these close up. Hopefully you can see how crispy they are and that texture. These are absolutely delicious. And they're surprisingly nutritious given that it's like an appetizer with a batter on it. So what we really did differently here compared to, if you were to get like a fried appetizer, we are not deep frying this. We're putting a little bit of breadcrumbs on it, but we're baking it, which significantly changes the amount of fat that this dish picks up, making it a lot healthier. Our base is a vegetable, so of course we're getting some fiber in that way and some vitamins and minerals, which is excellent, as opposed to doing, fried cheese or something like that that doesn't have quite as much nutritional value. By using the chickpea flour instead of a traditional like white flour, we added more protein and more fiber. So that's bumping the nutritional content by a significant degree as well. So even though they look, very, very crispy, like they might be deep fried and heavily battered, it's a pretty light coating that gives it a nice texture, a really satisfying crunch. And then you've got a nutritious vegetable on the inside. The sauce is very creamy. You can taste that curry powder and the lime, and mixes very, very well with the cauliflower. So it's a great appetizer if you're trying to do something that's a little bit healthier, but still fun. I think you could probably convince some picky eaters to enjoy this as well, because it looks pretty inviting. It looks like a more traditional appetizer, even though you secretly made it healthier. Now, in terms of substitutions, we use cauliflower today. I just accidentally almost said broccoli, but broccoli would be a no-brainer substitution for this. If you're not a big cauliflower person, or maybe you want to do both, broccoli would work just as well in this recipe. It will hold up in the oven. It'll pick up that batter nicely and be really crispy, as well as work well with that curry lime aioli sauce that we made. I mentioned that instead of using regular mayo, you can use a vegan or plant-based mayo if you want, so that's a swap opportunity. The chickpea flour, you can use regular flour, but I really want to push you towards a chickpea flour or a flour alternative like that, just because that's where some of the protein and fiber content of this recipe is coming from. You can use that traditional flour if you have it on hand or you don't want to pick up the chickpea flour, but this does boost the nutrition by a significant amount. So hopefully you enjoyed that recipe. Again, it's pretty simple to make. I think it's really excellent to think of creative ways to work more vegetables into our diet while still appealing to our natural desire for something, crispy and crunchy, and these come out so warm and tasty. You can keep them in the refrigerator for up to 4 days in an airtight container. What I'd recommend is if you want to reheat them, if you have an air fryer, you can pop them in the air fryer for a little bit and it'll crisp them up nicely again after they've been in the fridge kind of resting there. So that's the best way to reheat them. Of course, you could enjoy them chilled or in the microwave if you wanted to, but I highly recommend the air fryer method if you happen to have one. So we'll send out a copy of the recipe along with the nutrition information. A serving of this, it makes about 4 servings, and a serving is going to be about 2 or 1.5 cups of cauliflower, of the crispy cauliflower, with about 2 tablespoons of sauce. It has 7 grams of protein in it, which is pretty impressive for like an appetizer. If you do the full 1.5 cup serving, it is about 300 calories. So that is a significant portion for if you're doing like a snack or a pre-meal appetizer. So you may want to scale it down a little bit, enjoy just a couple pieces, but this is great for putting out at a social event, a party, you're playing board games or watching a movie or something like that. So I encourage you to find creative ways to work it into your diet. I do see some comments popping up here, so I want to take a look at those and try to address those real quick. Could you use sour cream instead of mayo for the sauce? So that's a really interesting idea. The sauce, since we're not really doing anything like baking or cooking with it, you could make the sauce into whatever you want. Sour cream would be really light and refreshing, and I think you could definitely add, whether it's curry powder or cumin or whatever seasoning you want to it to give it a little bit more oomph or more flavor. I think that would go great in the center here. My roommate actually mentioned that she thought these would be good with ketchup, which, yeah, I agree with that. So if you don't want to do the mayo-based curry lime aioli, any sort of dipping sauce in the middle there would be good. Hummus would probably be really tasty on these. The cauliflower bites just have such a nice texture to them that I don't think there's much you could go wrong dipping them into. Would this recipe work with frozen cauliflower? Good question. So When it comes to frozen vegetables, if we were going to do something like this, you would need to thaw them first. The difficulty that we run into with thawing a frozen vegetable is they can get a little soft compared to the fresh variant. So, this is fresh cauliflower. It is pretty firm still, which, like broccoli, I think helps it hold up in the oven better. If you were to use frozen broccoli or frozen cauliflower, I'm not 100% sure on how the texture would work once you got it into the oven. I would say give it a try, see how it works out. You may need to cook it a slightly different length of time in order to get it where you want. I think the texture will be best with fresh vegetables, but frozen vegetables are convenient and easy to keep on hand. So if you do try that, please let us know how it works out. I'd love to know. Oh, okay, I see someone mentioned maybe doing half sour cream, half mayo. Absolutely, if you wanted to sort of mix and match there, that could work. And you might also want, if you wanted to do a light sour cream, a light mayo to reduce the fat content of the sauce a little bit, you absolutely could. That's entirely up to you. When you see that nutrition label on the recipe, I encourage you to take a look at it and decide if it fits into what you're looking for this type of item. Question, would almond flour add the same additional nutrition to this recipe? So the best way to make a comparison like this, and I always encourage people to work on this skill, look at those nutrition labels. So the next time you're in the store, whether you're looking at regular flour, whole wheat, gluten-free, almond, chickpea, whatever they come up with next, pick up one and look at the nutrition label. Make sure that the serving size is the same so that you're comparing like a quarter of a cup to a quarter of a cup, for example, and just scan it and see what you see. One may be higher in protein or higher in fiber. There's no perfect answer, and I just encourage people to compare them and look at them to see how that nutrition content works out. Typically, when you make a flour from something like a chickpea, or if you make pasta from like a chickpea-based thing, we see a lot of the protein, we see a lot of the fiber, and that's why we lean towards that. But whole wheat's a good option. Almond flour could be great for like allergen purposes, for example, or if you just like almond flour. So compare those labels and see what you happen to find. Question about would they cook well with an air fryer or if oven's best? Oh, you can absolutely use this in the air fryer. It'll work well. Just keep in mind, I assume most of us at home, our air fryers are a little smaller in capacity. So the baking sheet allows them to all get that even heat and cook well. You can definitely do it in the air fryer, but just be aware of the fact that you may not be able to fit a full batch in there. So you might have to do it in waves. If you got the patience or the time for that, I think that will get them really, really crispy and nice. But as I mentioned, you can also make them in the oven. And then if you want to reheat the leftovers in the air fryer, that works great too. Here's a comment that said, if you wanted more protein, you could use Greek yogurt as a substitute for sour cream and add what spices you wanted to. Great comment. So Greek yogurt, plain Greek yogurt, no like fruit flavors or vanilla or anything like that. Excellent source of protein. Has a really tart, like bright flavor to it, similar to sour cream, very cool and refreshing. So a lot of people will use plain Greek yogurt in place of sour cream on like tacos or dishes like that. So if you wanted plain Greek yogurt in the middle and add that tartness, give you a lot more protein to it, I think that's a great suggestion. Thank you for mentioning that. So that looks like all the questions I can see right now. So keep an eye out in your email. We're going to send a follow-up, which will include the recipe, the nutrition information, as well as a link to a short survey where you can let us know what you thought of today's program. If you've got ideas for future recipes, feedback, suggestions, anything like that, we love to hear it. So keep an eye out for that email. Additionally, we do events like this all throughout the month. So if you are interested in more cooking demonstrations, yoga, meditation, mindfulness, and more, we encourage you to get on our email mailing list. You can email us at edws. Oh, actually, I take that back. If you want to get on that mailing list, the best email to reach out to us at right now is going to be my email, and I'll put it in the chat here in a second. We're going to do rsmith250@gsu.edu, and I'll get you added on our mailing list directly. That'll save some time going back and forth that way. So that's rsmith250@gsu.edu, and we can get you on our mailing list where each week we send out a list of all the different events we'll be doing. We do cooking demonstrations about twice a month, so I definitely encourage you to check those out the next time you happen to see them on the USG calendar or on our GSU web calendar. With that being said, thank you everyone for attending today. I hope you enjoyed it. Keep an eye out for that email and that follow-up communication, and we hope to see you at our next event. Thank you so much.